Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Wednesday morning, talking 10 games around the NBA. Before we dive into the slate, quick reminder, please make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button down below. Also, if you're not following me on Twitter or taking advantage of my projections or content, you can change that in a couple ways. Head over to the Twitter machine, hit that follow button. My Twitter handle at BrentHyden1 is in the description down below. While you're there, you can send me a direct message, find out how you can get access to the projections, content, Discord, and all that good stuff for 50% off for the rest of the season. Also, my Patreon page, patreon.com/BrentHyden, is in the description down below. You can head over there and take advantage of some of the monthly options that I have available. But we're going to go ahead and dive into the slate here. First game that we're going to talk about, Toronto at Indiana. Indiana, 4.5-point favorites in this one. We have a 217.5 over under. Kawhi Leonard and OG Anunoby out for this game. I have interest in Pascal Siakam, Serge Ibaka, Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet. Those are the primary guys that you're going to want to look at in this spot here tonight. Obviously, with Kawhi Leonard being out, that's going to open up minutes for some other value plays, which we'll get to in just a moment. But Pacers really have struggled to defend the three-point line lately. They're allowing 40.2% on three-point attempts on above the break threes over the last 10 games. That makes Danny Green a pretty solid tournament option here. Danny Green coming in at he is 4,700 over on DraftKings. Let me pull up his FanDuel price here one moment. He generally struggles whenever Kawhi Leonard is not in the lineup, and that is a little bit concerning. He is 5K over on FanDuel. That being said, again, Toronto really struggling to defend the three-point line. I don't hate taking a shot on him in this spot here tonight. Had one really strong game against Memphis. Did struggle against the Kings, even playing limited minutes there. Kind of a ideal tournament option in this spot. I mentioned Pascal Siakam being a really strong option here. It comes in at 6,200 on DraftKings, 6,700 over on FanDuel. Pacers struggled against power forwards this season. They're also someone that you can take advantage from the three-point line. Siakam, 1.10 fantasy points per minute, 23% usage whenever Kawhi Leonard and Jonas Valanciunas are off the floor. 18% of his shots come from beyond the arc. Serge Ibaka's fine in this spot as well. 19% of his shots come from beyond the arc. He obviously has the higher usage rate in this spot whenever you take Kawhi Leonard off the floor. 29.8% usage rate, 1.34 fantasy points per minute. But I'm still leaning Siakam a little bit over him. And then when we're looking at Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, Kyle Lowry, 24.3% usage rate, 1.30 fantasy points per minute. And then Fred VanVleet averages right around a fantasy point per minute. He's coming off a monster game last night. That's definitely going to inflate his ownership, but 46% of his shots come from beyond the arc, so he is definitely someone that we can look at here. Same with Kyle Lowry. I'm perfectly fine with either option and cash in tournaments. Obviously, the matchup's not perfect, but 7 rebounds, 7 assists, 19 points. Obviously showed his upside in this spot or last night, and then has been pretty strong in this spot twice already this season. So I definitely think Fred VanVleet is a perfectly fine option. And then Kyle Lowry also, again, perfectly fine cash and tournament option. You can even look at CJ Miles, who's been playing really well recently. He's playing limited minutes, and that's a little bit concerning. Only 17, 16 in the last 3 games, but over 20 fantasy points in each of those games. It is a revenge game for CJ Miles, so I don't hate taking a shot on him there. Outside of that, no real interest in anyone else from Toronto. On the Indiana side, the Raptors we've been able to attack with in the paint and on above the break threes, and also with power forwards, as we saw Marvin Bagley last night, someone that I wrote up in the breakdown yesterday, took a lot of shots in the paint, and that's an area where you can really exploit the Toronto Raptors of late. Thaddeus Young, really interesting in here. 24% of his shots come in the paint. Raptors allowing almost 45% shooting in the paint over the last 10 games. He's really cheap. He's just 5,600 over on DraftKings. This is a pretty good spot here for him. I like him in cash. I like him in tournaments, and he's been playing pretty well of late. He's also pretty cheap over on FanDuel at just 5,800, averaging 26.6. 27.7 fantasy points per game over the last 4 games. Did struggle a little against Charlotte. Played limited minutes against Dallas and Charlotte, but has still been really, really good. Bojan Bogdanovic, someone that I have a lot of interest in. He's been really good against the Raptors this season, averaging 19.5 points on 52% shooting to go along with 7 rebounds per game in their previous meetings. 54% of his shots come in the paint or above the break threes, and he's someone that I always really like in cash and tournaments just because he's really safe. Obviously, again, did struggle against Dallas and Philly. Field goal attempts are there. Rebounding has been there for him as well. And as I mentioned, has been pretty solid against Toronto in their 2 previous meetings. Victor Oladipo is perfectly fine in cash and tournaments. Did put up a pretty strong outing against Charlotte despite shooting really, really poorly, just connected on just 35.4% of his shots in that game. But he's still a pretty strong cash option. Usage and production should be there for him. Darren Collison is fine in tournaments. Sabonis, Miles Turner, 2 really, really strong tournament options. Neither really jumps off the page, but their price is really appealing. I would lean towards probably Sabonis being the better tournament option here tonight. And then Tyreke Evans, really, really strong value play, especially in tournaments or on FanDuel, where he's still really cheap. He is just 4,300 over on FanDuel. Has been playing really well. Has been over 20 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4, 5 of the last 6 games. Still playing limited minutes. That's always seen an issue for him, but again, has been playing pretty darn well of late. Moving on to Cleveland at Boston. Boston 17.5 point favorites in this game. 216 over under. Al Horford, Tristan Thompson, David Nwaba, Larry Nance, Kevin Love all out for this game. There's really not a whole lot of reason to look at the Cleveland side of this game. As I kind of wrote up, the best places to look would be Jordan Clarkson, ALEC BURKS, mostly because of Clarkson usage off the bench and ALEC BURKS' price tag and his ability to put up a really strong game, even in limited minutes. And then Ante Zizic, obviously a strong cash option with Tristan Thompson out. He's been really good of late. 6K on DraftKings, 5,400 on FanDuel. Top 30 fantasy points in 4 straight games and 5 of his last 6. We know the minutes are going to be there for him, even in a blowout, just because they don't have anyone else. 6K is really, really unattractive, though, especially with some really, really good mid-range center options that we're going to talk about here shortly. But again, he's someone that you can look at here. As I mentioned, Jordan Clarkson, ALEC BURKS, 2 guys to at least consider. ALEC BURKS, 4,100 is pretty appealing here. He's 3,800 on FanDuel, makes a really, really strong drop option. Minutes, obviously a little bit of concern. They've been kind of trending down. Obviously, some of that is blowout concern. He's in the starting lineup. That does hurt him. But if he can get, 24 to 26 minutes, he has shown the ability to put up a strong game. Outside of that, like I said, Jordan Clarkson's fine in tournaments. He's really, really cheap. His minutes have not really been there, but again, the usage and production has been pretty solid for him. So he would be pretty much the only person that I have much interest in outside of if you're building a lot of lineups, 150 lineups, Hood, Sexton, guys that you can at least consider adding into your player pool. The Boston side of this game is a little bit more appealing. Obviously, Kyrie Irving coming in as in a revenge game, facing the Cavaliers, who rank 30th in defensive efficiency to opposing point guards this season. He has been outstanding recently, averaging 30.8 points on 60.3% shooting with 11 assists over his last 4 games. He's coming off a game where he had 8 steals. That is just insane for Kyrie Irving. He has been over 60 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. This game, it's probably going to blow out. That being said, if he gets 28-30 minutes, there's a decent chance that he has his hand in that blowout. Did have a really good game against Cleveland in 27 minutes last time out. Went 11 of 15 from the floor with 41 fantasy points. I like him in tournaments. I think he's still perfectly fine in cash. Again, blowout risk is a little bit of a concern, but as I've preached countless times before, don't try to plan on blowouts, and it doesn't necessarily change the player's floor or their projection. It just changes their odds of hitting their upside. So Kyrie Irving, a really good option. Marcus Smart, a really good option. He comes in at 4,600 on DraftKings, 5,300 on FanDuel. Continues to be a strong cash game play just because the minutes are going to be there for him. Outside of that game against Atlanta where he got tossed, He does have the ability to get hot. We saw him go 6 of 8 from 3 against Memphis, against a Cleveland team that really struggles to defend the 3-point line, allowing 37% on 3-point attempts. Marcus Smart, pretty strong option. Also sees about a 2% usage boost without Al Horford on the floor. Marcus Morris also sees the 2% usage boost without Al Horford on the floor. Cleveland ranks 21st in defensive, or 28th in defensive efficiency to opposing power forwards. They're shooting 41.5% from 3 against Cleveland. That's a pretty big boost to Marcus Morris, who takes 44% of his shots from 3 and has connected on 43% of those shots this season. He's 5K on DraftKings, 5,300 on FanDuel. Has started to trend upwards a little bit, shooting a little bit better over the last couple of games. That is really good to see. Again, matchup really, really, really good for Marcus Morris. You can look at Jason Tatum, Gordon Hayward, Jaylen Brown in tournaments. Cleveland is allowing opponents to shoot 68.2% at the rim this season. That is a pretty big boost for Jaylen Brown, who takes 42% of his shots at the rim. Unfortunately, the biggest concern is obviously the minutes may or may not be there for him, but he is going to be a pretty big usage guy off of the bench. Could get a couple extra minutes if this game blows out. With Al Horford resting this game, both Aaron Baines and Daniel Theis, two guys that we could look at as values. Baines coming in at 3,500 on DraftKings, 3,700 on FanDuel. Really strong cash option. Unfortunately, again, center is really strong with other values in the spot. So I'm leaning towards Daniel Theis being a better option here. Would see probably 18 to 20 minutes. I have him at 18, assuming this game plays out in a normal game script, but if it is a monster blowout, could see a few extra minutes, especially with Robert Williams, I believe, still being down with the main Red Claws. So moving on, we have the next game of the night is going to be Houston at the New York Knicks. Houston 7-point favorites in this one, 227.5 over under. Chris Paul, Brandon Knight are out. Of course, Trey Burke is questionable, and Luke Cornett is out for this game. Harden has scored 30 or more points in 20 straight games. That's insane. 20 straight games he has scored at least 30 points. I don't need to go on and on and on and on about James Harden. Obviously, against the Knicks, who are one of the league's worst defenses, giving up 115.4 points per game, James Harden is a great option. That being said, as I have harped on before, if you're playing in like the lower dollar tournaments, the 3, the 4, the 8s, things like that, it's a really good idea to fade James Harden because he is rarely in the GPP winning lineup. Even when he's dropping 85, 90 fantasy points, he's still not in those GPP winning lineups. So if you're doing large field GPPs or the 3 max or something like that, and you're in that low dollar, that mid, like the 4 to 10, 3 to 10 range or whatever, 3 to 12, I would definitely recommend fading Harden in those tournaments. The higher dollar tournaments, it does look like he has been in some of those lineups recently, so that's something to at least consider. And then, of course, in cash games, whenever you're looking at a guy that's averaging 76.6 fantasy points per game over his last 6, it is a little bit tough to consider fading. There's enough value on this slate already, I think, that you can get him in with potentially another guy like Nikola Vucevic or D'Angelo Russell or someone else that we're going to get to here shortly. I do like looking at the rest of Houston here. Obviously, again, the matchup is really, really good. I absolutely love Kenneth Faried in this spot. Played 23 minutes against the Sixers. Didn't have a great game. Wasn't terrible. He comes in at 4,400 on DraftKings, 5K on FanDuel. Shot 5 of 7 from the floor. That was good to see. The rebounding wasn't really there for him. You do expect that to go up in a significantly better matchup. 4 fouls in 23 minutes. That was a little bit concerning, but I would expect his minutes to start to trend upwards, and obviously the matchup is outstanding here. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets closer to 30 minutes here. Obviously, they don't want to play Nene very much, and Marquise Chris is just never going to ever see the floor. Knicks giving up 14.5 second chance points, 53.1 points in the paint, and 48 rebounds per game. Kenneth Faried should absolutely smash in this spot. Austin Rivers draws a really good matchup. The Knicks are allowing opponents to shoot 36.2% on 3-pointers. He's taking 59% of his shots from beyond the arc. I like Austin Rivers here in this spot, 4,600 on DraftKings, 4,600 on FanDuel. Obviously, really struggled against Philly, but the minutes are just ridiculous for him. The field goal attempts are there for him. The peripherals have been there for him, so he's a really strong cash or tournament option in this spot. PJ Tucker, really strong cash and tournament option in this spot. New York allowing 40% on corner threes, as I have highlighted before. PJ Tucker taking 51% of his shots from the corners. Obviously, Kenneth Faried being there is going to take a little bit of the upside away as far as rebounding goes, but this is still a really good spot here for PJ Tucker, who is just 5,200 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Gerald Green, a strong value option, and then Eric Gordon. I would like to hear that his minutes are going to trend upwards. Obviously, I do expect them to be somewhat limited still. He's still coming off that injury, but if we get like word that he is not going to be on a minutes restriction, the usage and the production is going to be way too tough to overlook at 5,700 on DraftKings and 5,300 on FanDuel. The Knicks are back to Knicksing with Luke Cornett being out. Enes Kanter is projected to start, and at just 5K on DraftKings, I don't know how you fade Enes Kanter in the spot. He should absolutely smash. He comes in at 6,200 on FanDuel. That's a little less appealing, but I do expect him to see about 24-25 minutes. Rockets over the last 3 games have allowed 56 rebounds to opponents. Enes Kanter should feast in this spot. Like I'm not gonna fade Enes Kanter, especially on DraftKings at 5K. Obviously, you are a little bit worried about the minutes for him because, well, the Knicks are the Knicks. Fizdale is Fizdale, but given how vocal Kanter has been about his role on the team, I expect him to come out and try to just absolutely feast. Even if he plays 24-25 minutes, we've seen him put up like 35, 40 plus fantasy points in limited minutes. So I'm not fading Enes Kanter here. I like Noah Vonleh, 5,800 on DraftKings, 5,400 on FanDuel. Both guys really strong options here. Kevin Knox, a really strong option here. With Houston struggling to defend in the paint, they're giving up 53.4 points in the paint. Kevin Knox, who is averaging almost 5 points in the paint per game, is pretty interesting. 30% of his shots come at the rim, which is also really interesting for Kevin Knox, who, with the Rockets allowing opponents to shoot 68% at the rim. He's underpriced, I think, in this spot. 5,100 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. He's a really strong option here. Obviously, the minutes should be there for him against OKC. They were not, did struggle in that matchup. Washington really struggled. The 11 field goal attempts were appealing. We've seen the upside for him. He's just really struggled recently. A lot of these games have been really bad. More of a tournament option in this spot, I think, but I really like him a lot here tonight. The rest of the guys, Damian Dotson, Mitchell Robinson, Mudiay, Hardaway, guys like that, all just going to be tournament options. Damian Dotson, really strong tournament option, especially over on FanDuel where he's 3,700. 3,500 on DraftKings is fine. He's been really good of late as well. His minutes have been really steady. His top 20 minutes in all but one of his last 10 games. He did struggle against OKC. A lot of people struggle against OKC, but 20 plus fantasy points in the 3 straight games before that. I like him in tournaments. As far as Moody and the rest of those guys go, again, they're just tournament options. Tim Hardaway Jr. at 5,900. That is pretty tough to ignore. He's 5,700 on FanDuel. Again, more of a tournament option. We've seen his minutes start to trend downwards a little bit. Could be injury related. He has been dealing with that plantar fasciitis a little bit. And obviously, with the Knicks going young, Tim Hardaway Jr. doesn't necessarily fit those plans. Moving on, Clippers at Miami. Miami 5-point favorites in this one, 217.5 over under. Lou Williams, I'm going to call him questionable for this game. Played yesterday, was dealing hamstring injury before that. Would not be shocked with this being a back-to-back. Losing an hour through travel, I would not be shocked if he missed this game. Danilo Gallinari is out and Goran Dragic remains out. Patrick Beverley has been playing really well, averaging 17 points and 10.5 rebounds over the past 2 games. He's been playing a lot of minutes because, well, they've been shorthanded. And with Lou Williams potentially being questionable for this game, again, I am calling him questionable. That is not official. Patrick Beverley could be in line for a lot more minutes and a really, really strong role. He's 5K on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel, really strong cash option. Again, matchup not the greatest. He did have a really good outing against his team last time out. 24 minutes, 28 fantasy points. I like him in cash. I like him in tournaments. There is upside there for him tonight. Tobias Harris, 26% usage rate, 1.33 fantasy points per minute without Gallo on the floor. Those numbers don't really change whenever you take Lou Williams off the floor. It is a good spot for him. Heat ranked 25th in defensive efficiency to opposing power forwards. Again, in line for a lot of minutes. Only played 34 last night. Would expect that to be like 36, 35, 36. And again, it is a really strong matchup for him here tonight. I like him in cash. I like him in tournaments as a bounce back option here. Outside of that, Avery Bradley, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Montrezl Harrell, guys you can look at in tournaments. Montrezl Harrell, 6,700 on DraftKings, 7,500 on FanDuel. And just has really struggled. The rebounding hasn't necessarily been there for him. The scoring hasn't necessarily been there for him. But again, in tournaments, we've seen him have upside. Even in this matchup, the last time these teams played, Hassan Whiteside was out, 10 points, 9 rebounds. There is potential here for him. And then again, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Avery Bradley, it's just tournament value options here. Shai Gilgeous really struggled last night. Avery Bradley is never a guy that has a lot of upside, but has been over 20 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. Again, minutes going to be there for him. Did struggle against this team last time out. I'm not looking at anyone else, not the Mike Scotts or anyone like that. On the Miami side of things, I hate Miami. They're rolling like 11 players. Kelly Olynyk's barely getting off the bench some games. Dion Waiters is barely getting off the bench some games. It makes it really, really tough. Justice Winslow is really the guy that I have my eye on here. It is a really good matchup here for Justice Winslow. He comes in at a really strong price, 6,400 across the industry. Clippers 22nd defensive efficiency to opposing point guards, allowing 25.6 points, 6 rebounds, 8.7 assists. Takes 20% of his shots in the mid-range or as corner threes. The Clippers have really struggled to defend those areas lately. Again, his ability to fill up the stat sheet makes him a really strong cash and tournament option. Again, 6,400, had a really good game against this team last time out. Has struggled in the last 2 minutes, have been down a little bit because of some blowouts and things like that. I don't expect that to be the case here tonight. Played almost 40 minutes against the Clippers. Again, there are some people that were out last time, Josh Richardson being one of them, Hassan Whiteside being out as well, but a really strong outing there. Dwayne Wade continues to be a fantastic cash and tournament option. 4,800 on DraftKings, 4,900 on FanDuel. He's just a guy that most nights you can plug in your lineup and expect him to get 20 plus fantasy points with upside, especially if he's going to be coming in and getting like 7, 8 assists with a handful of rebounds. I really like Dwayne Wade in this spot. I like Hassan Whiteside in tournament, 6K on DraftKings, 6,800 on FanDuel. Again, the issue with him, minutes. But that price is really, really, really attractive. If he can get 26 to 28 minutes, he has upside here. Clippers really, really bad against opposing centers. They're giving up a boatload of rebounds per game, giving up 45.8 rebounds, 14.4 second chance points, 51.5 points in the paint. This is a really good spot for Hassan Whiteside. There's a lot of options in that price range, really, really good options in that price range. So he would just be tournaments for me. I don't like Bam don't dislike taking a shot on Bam Adebayo as well. 4,600 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. He's the one that's getting those minutes. When Whiteside isn't playing, he's a really, really productive player. And again, it is a really, really strong matchup. Again, 4,600, that's really appealing over on DraftKings. A little less appealing at 5,500 on FanDuel, but still not a terrible spot here for him tonight. The rest of the guys, Josh Richardson, always a fine cash option, especially at his price. He's pretty cheap. He's 6,100 on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. Again, more of a cash option. Upside hasn't necessarily been there for him, but again, matchup is pretty solid for him. Outside of that, you can look at Dion Waiters, Derek Jones, Kelly Olynyk, James Johnson as tournament options only, just because Spoelstra has talked about how he needs to get all of these guys minutes. And, well, unfortunately, whenever you're trying to get, Kelly Olynyk 20 minutes. That's going to come at the expense of Derrick Jones Jr. When Derrick Jones Jr. is playing like 20 plus minutes, that's going to come at the expense of Kelly Olynyk, Dion Waiters. All these guys take a little bit of a hit, but Dion Waiters has been really strong recently. He comes in at 4,300 on DraftKings and 4,700 on FanDuel. He's been playing really well, has been getting the minutes, but it's not guaranteed to stick. So again, just tournaments only for Dion Waiters. Moving on to the next game of the night, Orlando and Brooklyn. This one very, very appealing. Brooklyn 6-point favorites in this one, 216.5 over under. Aaron Gordon questionable, Jared Dudley, Danzan Musa, and Alan Crabb and Karis LeVert all out for this game. Rodions Kurucs 22 of 35 from the floor over those last 4 games, and DJ Augustin 9 of 14 from 3-point range over his last 3 games. Looking at the Orlando side, Nikola Vucevic should feast in the spot. Leads the team in usage 27%. Nets giving up a league high 62.2 fantasy points per game. 23rd in defensive efficiency to centers. They've allowed 51.7, 51.5 points in the paint. 14.4 second chance points. It's a smash spot here for Nikola Vucevic. I absolutely love him in cash and tournaments. Going to be a guy that I'm trying to build my lineups around. Had a good game against Brooklyn last time these teams faced off. 50 fantasy points. Has topped 50 fantasy points in 2 of the last 4. Basically a guy that you feel pretty comfortable is going to get you 40 plus almost every single night with plenty of upside. So I really like Nikola Vucevic in this spot. Aaron Gordon, a really strong tournament play if he's able to suit up. Terrence Ross, Evan Fournier, DJ Augustin, always really, really strong cash and tournament options. Terrence Ross, a guy, has been playing really well recently. 5,700 on DraftKings, 5,400 on FanDuel. Has fallen below 20 fantasy points just once over his last 10 games. Has flashed a ton of upside. Field goal attempts have been there for him. He sees a little bit of a boost if Aaron Gordon were to sit this one out, but Evan Fournier also 6,100, second on the team in usage. He's a pretty strong option here. And then again, DJ Augustin 4,800, as is the case every single night. A guy you feel pretty confident is going to get you 20 plus fantasy points. I like him in cash. Jonathan Isaac, a strong tournament value, but the price tag is a little bit too high for him here tonight. On the Brooklyn side of things, it starts with D'Angelo Russell. It's been ridiculous, 22.4 points, 48.8% field goal percentage, and 37.7% from 3. He's been really good recently. Coming in at 8K over on DraftKings. He is expensive over on FanDuel as well, but for good reason. He is 8,600 over on FanDuel, but pulling up his game log, has topped 50 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. Dude has been just playing lights out basketball. Obviously, a little bit of risk at the elevated price tag that, if Russell's playing like garbage like he did against Houston and Spencer Dinwiddie's playing really well, Dinwiddie's going to play over Russell. But given that Russell has been the hottest hand over Dinwiddie of late, I really, really like him here. 65% of, I was looking at something else. DeMarre Carroll has been solid over his last 10 games, averaging 16.6 points per game along with 6 rebounds. Has topped 30 fantasy points in 7 of those games. 17% of his shots come as corner threes. Magic have allowed 43.5% shooting on corner threes. I like DeMarre Carroll a significant amount in this spot, coming in at 4,700 on DraftKings, 4,500 on FanDuel. Did struggle a little bit against Orlando the last time out, but I still really like him here as a value option. Rodions Kurucs has been, again, as I mentioned, really strong recently, shooting the ball really, really well. GPPs only, has upside, of course, at his price. Minutes have not necessarily been there for him the last couple of games with Rondé Hollis-Jefferson returning, but the minutes have not been great for Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, who is 3,700 on DraftKings and 3,600 on FanDuel. Still, those double-digit minutes do take away from Rodions Kurucs. And then we have to consider Jarrett Allen, who's going to be pretty popular, I think, at 5,800. He's fine in cash. He's fine in tournaments. I think there's better places to look for upside in this spot tonight. Moving on to the next game of the night, we have Charlotte at Memphis. Woohoo. Memphis 1-point favorite in this game, 210 over under. Chandler Parsons, Dylan Brooks, Kyle Anderson, Cody Zeller, Joakim Noah all out for this game. Marc Gasol questionable. Garrett Temple and Omri Caspi are probable. Whew. It's a long, long injury list. Kemba Walker averaging 26.2 points per game over the last 5 games. He has actually topped 20 points in each of his past 5 games. Nick Batum, some home road splits for you with Nick Batum, 43.3% from 3-point range at home, 36.8% on the road. And, well, this is a road game. Looking at the Charlotte side of things first, it's not a whole lot of appeal. I will say there are a couple options that are interesting. Excuse me. Grizzlies allowing opposing 3-point shooters to hit 49% of corner threes over the last 10 games. That makes Marvin Williams really, really interesting here. He's a guy that I've profiled a significant amount recently. 19% of his shots come as corner threes. He did struggle last time out in his last game, but he has scored in double figures in the 3 straight wins prior to Sunday. Had just 9 points on 3 of 13 shooting in Sunday's game, but he comes in at just 4,700 on DraftKings, 5K on FanDuel. Matchup not ideal again, but his ability to hit shots from the corners, this game could go small a little bit. Marvin Williams would get some small ball 5 minutes. He's a guy that you feel pretty confident is going to get you 20 plus fantasy points, right around that 24-25 with upside most nights. Has done that a significant amount of late. I really like Marvin Williams as a way to get exposure to this game without paying a pretty penny. Kemba Walker, right around 32% usage rate with no Cody Zeller on the floor. He's coming off 40 plus fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. Hopefully he's starting to turn things around because his start to 2019 was absolutely atrocious. It's not a great spot for him here, but again, 8,100 on DraftKings, 9K on FanDuel. The price tag, at least on DraftKings, is somewhat appealing. One area Memphis has really struggled, shooting guards, 24th in defensive efficiency to the position, allowing 24.9 points on a 44.1% field goal percentage and 39.9% from 3. Jeremy Lamb could be a really, really strong option in here. 5,300 on DraftKings for Jeremy Lamb, 6K over on FanDuel. He's been really good. He did struggle a little bit against the Pacers, but he's a guy, again, kind of like Marvin Williams, mid-20s is your expectation with upside for Jeremy Lamb. Again, matchup, not great for him. Or matchup is the best matchup as far as anyone goes for the Charlotte side of this game. So he's the guy that I would consider here. Biyombo, the big man that you can target, 4,200 on DraftKings, 4,700 on FanDuel, has been playing pretty well. But there's so many other value center options, I don't really see a need to go there. The Memphis Grizzlies, who are in just a heap of turmoil right now, are the more appealing side. That being said, they are coming off losses in 12 of the last 13 games, 17 of the last 20, and they're averaging like 100.6 points per game. Mike Conley does draw a really, really good matchup here. 7,500 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel. More appealing on DraftKings at that price tag. Obviously, he's been really, really, really up and down. But if this game stays close, he's going to play 30-plus minutes. He's going to take double-digit 14, 15, 16 field goal attempts. Hornets allowing 23.9 points, 5.8 rebounds, 8.5 assists, 44% shooting, and 36.1% from 3. They're allowing opponents to shoot 43% in the paint and mid-range, where Conley is attempting 40% of his shots. He is a great option in this spot. I think he is a really, really, really strong cash and tournament play here, and I don't think people are going to look at Mike Conley. So in large field tournaments, he has some appeal here. Justin Holiday, Garrett Temple, really, really strong values here. The Hornets are allowing opponents to shoot 41.9% on corner threes. Both of those guys taking right around 20 to 25% of their shots from the corners. You have Garrett Temple at 3,800 on DraftKings, 4,200 on FanDuel. Justin Holiday, 3,700 on DraftKings, 5K on FanDuel. The minutes have been solid there for Justin Holiday of late. The production has been kind of up and down. Garrett Temple, a little bit better cash game option. Justin Holiday, the better tournament option in the spot. I do like JaMychal Green and Jaren Jackson as GPP mid-range options, with Green being the guy I think would definitely go overlooked in this spot. Charlotte has struggled on the boards and to protect the rim, so there is some upside for both of those guys. Same goes with Marc Gasol, assuming he plays. Hornets have really struggled against opposing centers with Cody Zeller being out. Marc Gasol, 7,400 on DraftKings, 7,600 on FanDuel. Had a bounce back game against the Pelicans, 9 of 19 in just in 35 minutes. It is a pretty decent spot for him if he's able to suit up. Again, more of a tournament option. He is safe in cash, but I think there's better options to look at. Shelvin Mack, Omri Caspi would be the two value options in this spot. Shelvin Mack had a really bad game last time out, 3,500 on DraftKings, 4K on FanDuel, but prior to the Pelicans game, had been playing pretty well with 20 fantasy points in 4 of the last 4 straight games. Sorry, has some upside here in the spot. And then Omri Caspi, again, someone else that could hit some shots from 3, was playing pretty well before the New Orleans game as well, with 20 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games. He's obviously seeing extra minutes and extra shots with Kyle Anderson being out. Moving on to the next game of the night, Detroit at the New Orleans Pelicans. New Orleans 4.5 point favorites in this one, 222.5 over under. Andre Drummond is questionable for this game, has not cleared concussion protocol, but we will know early on in the afternoon if he is going to be able to play. Henry Ellenson is questionable. Ish Smith is doubtful. Pistons have dropped their past 9 visits to New Orleans, and Jrue Holiday scored 21 points against Memphis for his 4th 20-point effort in 5 games. Andre Drummond is in a smash spot if he's able to suit up. Obviously, the Pelicans without Anthony Davis are going to start Jahlil Okafor at the 5, and that is good news for Andre Drummond, who comes in at 8,800 on DraftKings and 9,100 on FanDuel. Would be a guy that I would definitely consider pivoting off of Nikola Vucevic for Andre Drummond if he's able to play. Had a really good game against New Orleans last time these teams faced off, so he's someone that I have interest in if he's able to suit up cash and tournament options. Or actually, more of a tournament play, I think. Yeah, I'm going to go more of a tournament play. Outside of that, Blake Griffin, Zaza Pachulia would be the really, really good options, assuming if Andre Drummond sits. Blake Griffin, already a strong option here, leads the team in usage almost 30% on the season. New Orleans has allowed 21.9 points on a 47% and 38% shooting split to power forwards on the season. Fast-paced game, Blake Griffin, 9,700 on DraftKings, 9,800 on FanDuel. A really strong cash and tournament option here tonight. Reggie Bullock, whose name has recently surfaced in trade talks, could be motivated to play a little bit better. Maybe wants to get out of Detroit. New Orleans getting killed by opposing small forwards, allowing 44 fantasy points per game, 29th in defensive efficiency, and their inability to defend the 3-point line. New Orleans allowing 41.2% on corner threes on the season, 36.8% on 3-point attempts overall. 17% of Reggie Bullock's shots are corner threes. 47% of his shots are above the break threes. Reggie Bullock, one of my favorite value options on this slate, comes in at 4,500 on DraftKings, 5K on FanDuel. We know the minutes are going to be there for him. We know the field goal attempts are going to be there for him. It's a really, really good spot for him. He just needs to hit his shots, get you a couple of rebounds, assists, maybe some blocks or steals, and he should be able to easily pay off that salary. I love Reggie Bullock in the spot. You can look at Reggie Jackson. Last game, it was a little bit concerning. They did some Bruce Brown at starting at point guard. They gave Kalen Lucas some minutes at point guard, and that came at the expense of Reggie Jackson. Bruce Brown in tournaments or on FanDuel. Luke Kennard, tournaments, FanDuel. Langston Galloway, tournaments, FanDuel. Guys that you can look at. Langston Galloway, 3,500 on DraftKings, 3,500 on FanDuel. Doesn't project to play a ton of minutes, but he's a guy, if he comes in and gets hot, you never know. Got really hot against New Orleans last time out. Had 24 points in that game. He's worth a look, especially over on FanDuel. The New Orleans side, it's Julius Randle, Drew Holiday, Nikola Mirotic. When you look at the usage and production for these guys with Anthony Davis off the floor, Julius Randle, 31.4% usage rate, 1.45 fantasy points per minute. Drew Holiday, 27.3% usage rate, and a 1.22 fantasy points per minute. Nikola Mirotic, 26.1% usage rate, 1.23 fantasy points per minute. Detroit ranks 5th in defensive efficiency to opposing power forwards, but they're giving up 51.1 points in the paint and 68.4% shooting at the rim. Randle, without Anthony Davis on the floor, leads the team in usage and points in the paint with 13 per game, and 58% of his shots come at the rim. He's an excellent option in all formats. He is now power forward eligible over on FanDuel. That's going to be a pain in the butts with when Anthony Davis returns. But for now, 8,400 on DraftKings, 8,900 on FanDuel. A really strong option. Drew Holiday, 9,500 on FanDuel, 8,600 on DraftKings. Still my number 2 option in this spot. Detroit, 22nd defensive efficiency to opposing shooting guards. Really, really strong option here tonight. I do really, really like Drew Holiday in all formats. Nikola Mirotic would just be a tournament option for me. Same with Elfrid Payton. Jahlil Okafor, probably going to be a pretty popular option. 4,600 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. With guys like Fareed and Enes Kanter being in that same price range, I don't hate fading him here. Obviously, there is some foul trouble concern, especially if Andre Drummond is going to play in this game. That's a little bit concerning with Jahlil Okafor, but he's fine if you want to roll him in cash in tournaments. I still think I like Kenneth Fareed and Enes Kanter as better options. I don't really have a lot of interest in the Etuan Moores and the rest of this game unless you're just trying to force some exposure to that game. Atlanta at Chicago. Chicago 2.5-point favorites in this one. 221.5 over under. Plumlee, Bazemore, and Wendell Carter Jr. all out for this game, and Kevin Huerter is questionable. Lauri Markkanen has reached double figure scoring in 14 of his past 5 games, and Chicago has scored 100 or more points in 9 consecutive games. This game is going to be really, really good to target, and that starts on the Atlanta side with John Collins, Dwayne Dedmon, Trae Young, DeAndre Bembry, Kevin Huerter. All these guys really, really strong options here. Collins continues to be a beast, notching a double-double in 6 of his last 10 games. Chicago allowing 50.2 fantasy points per game to power forwards. They rank 19th in defensive efficiency to the position. The biggest downside with Collins is his price tag. He's 7,900 on DraftKings, 8,100 on FanDuel. That kind of kills his upside. More of a cash option. Really, really strong cash option. I do like him a significant amount. The status of Kevin Huerter is something we need to keep an eye on. Jeremy Lin, Taurean Prince would be people that we would look at if Kevin Huerter were to miss. Jeremy Lin is already a strong value option, would get a couple extra minutes if Kevin Huerter were to miss. Kevin Huerter, really, really strong cash and tournament option, has topped 25 fantasy points in 6 of his last 10 games. He comes in at just 5,500 across the industry. Pretty safe bet for 25 plus fantasy points. Really, really good matchup here for him tonight. And then Trae Young, 32% usage rate without Bazemore. Really, really appealing. He's always just a tournament option. He has been playing a little bit better of late. Chicago really, really, really struggling against opposing point guards. They rank 28th in defensive efficiency to the position. The biggest issue with him, obviously, is inconsistency. Like, has been playing, the 34 minutes against Boston, almost 30 minutes against Orlando. Shot decent against Orlando, but nothing else. Like he got some assists, a couple of rebounds, didn't hit any 3-pointers. Boston had a pretty strong game, but again, no rebounds, only a couple 3-pointers. He's been one of the worst 3-point shooters in the NBA this season. That's really, really problematic whenever you're looking for upside and floor. That being said, again, usage rate really, really high for him. DeAndre Bembry should get about 30 minutes, 5,300 on DraftKings, 5,900 on FanDuel. Continues to be a guy that is producing. Did struggle against Boston. A lot of people struggle against Boston, but Orlando, OKC, these games, he's been playing really, really well. Another guy that you feel pretty confident is going to get you mid-20s in fantasy points most nights. Dwayne Dedmon, 5,600 on DraftKings, 6,200 on FanDuel. Really, really strong option here too. He has top 25 fantasy points in 6 of his last 10 games. Bulls rank 4th in fantasy points per game. 2 opposing centers, 47.5 rebounds per game allowed. Yeah, Dwayne Dedmon, another really, 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 really good center option on the slate. On the Bulls side of things, you're primarily looking at Chris Dunn, Zach LaVine, Larry Markkinen, Bobby Portis, maybe Robin Lopez. Hawks ranked 29th in defensive efficiency to opposing point guards, 26th to shooting guards. I love Chris Dunn in cash and tournaments tonight. Obviously, does have triple-double upside. Atlanta is getting pounded in the paint and mid-range, where Dunn takes 58% of his shots this season. The assist rebounding upside is there for him. Most nights is going to be a tournament-only option for me. In this matchup with the pace, bad defense, he is cash viable for sure. Zach LaVine, more of a cash option here. Upside has been really, really hurt by the fact that he's not doing much else other than scoring. Most nights he's not getting you a lot of assists, not really getting you a lot of rebounds. He might throw in a steal or something like that every once in a while. But at 6,900 on DraftKings, it's really tough to imagine him getting like 40-plus fantasy points if he's not getting you the assists and all the other stuff that he was getting earlier in the season. He's 7,100 on FanDuel. Again, more of a cash option because of the usage and because of the field goal attempts. Tournament upside, I think, is a little bit capped. I love Bobby Portis in the spot. 5,800 on DraftKings, 5,400 on FanDuel. I would love to see him get some more minutes. I would love to see him closer to that 28-minute mark that they've talked about for his minutes cap. Is a really, really good spot here. Hawks' interior defense is atrocious, giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing power forwards and 10th most fantasy points per game to centers. They even have 14.6 second chance points. Bobby Portis has topped 30 fantasy points in 2 of the last 3. 47.7% of his field goal, the Hawks are allowing 47.7% shooting from the floor, 36.1% shooting from 3 to opposing power forwards. That makes Larry Markkinen pretty strong option here. 6,600 on DraftKings, 6,900 on FanDuel. Did struggle against Cleveland, 5 of 11 from the floor. That's the 11 shots is appealing. Didn't hit a lot of them. Rebounding, block, steal upside is there for him. In this matchup, he has a lot of upside. And then Robin Lopez, 3,800. It's going to get right around 20 to 24 minutes. 3,800 across the industry. That is at least attractive. And then Jabari Parker, just GPPs. He's not going to play more than 20 minutes, but could have some upside in limited minutes in this spot. Moving on, last 2 games of the night. San Antonio at Philly. Philly 4.5-point favorites, 226.5 over under. Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons questionable. Davis Bertans is out. San Antonio, I love Rudy Gay. One of my favorite options on the slate. Likely going to start once again at power forward. Sixers have struggled to defend power forwards. They rank 21st in defensive efficiency to the position, allowing 21.3 points, 11.5 rebounds, 48% shooting, and over 50 fantasy points per game to the position. Gay has topped 30 fantasy points in back-to-back games and double-digit field goal attempts in 8 straight games. Rudy Gay is cheap, 5,700 over on DraftKings. This is a really, really good spot for Rudy Gay. Again, I like him as one of the best ways to get exposure to this game. He's 5,500 on FanDuel. I'm not a huge fan of LaMarcus Aldridge or DeMar DeRozan. They do draw really, really tough matchups. Philly really, really good at limiting opposing field goal shooting in the paint, in the mid-range, and at the rim. For guys like DeRozan and Aldridge who thrive at getting their shots at the rim, in the paint, or the mid-range, it's kind of problematic. They can be used in tournaments. But outside of that, I just think there's better places to look here tonight. Bryn Forbes, Marco Bellinelli, Derek White. Slightly more appealing options here, especially for value. Bellinelli has been really strong recently, averaging 26.9 fantasy points per game over the last 4 games. Has topped 20 fantasy points in 6 straight, and with the Sixers really, really struggling lately to defend the three-point line, allowing almost 37% shooting on 3-pointers. Marco Bellinelli is someone that has some appeal. Same with Bryn Forbes and Derek White. Unfortunately, this game's just not that attractive from the San Antonio side of things. Sixers side of things, it's really going to depend on whether or not Jimmy Butler and Ben Simmons plays. Obviously, as is the case every single night, if Ben Simmons sits, you're looking at Jimmy Butler and Joel Embiid. If Jimmy Butler sits, you're looking at Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. If both of those guys sit, then, well, you're looking at TJ McConnell, Landry Shamet, Corey Brewer, Joel Embiid, Joel Embiid, Joel Embiid, Joel Embiid, Joel Embiid, and Joel Embiid. Embiid regardless of whether or not these guys sit, is a really, really strong option. It is worth noting the Spurs have allowed opponents to shoot 65% at the rim over the last 10 games, which is appealing given that Ben Simmons does take a boatload of his shots at the rim. 69% of his shots, or 70% of his shots now come at the rim. He is 8,700 on DraftKings, 9,900 on FanDuel. That's pretty darn appealing here. The Spurs have been pummeled in the paint and the mid-range as well, allowing about 42% shooting in those areas on the season. Jimmy Butler taking 42% of his shots in those areas. He is definitely a good GPP play if he suits up. If Ben Simmons plays, he's still a good GPP play. If Ben Simmons is out, of course, Jimmy Butler, someone that you probably don't want to fade at 7,300 on DraftKings, 8,200 on FanDuel. JJ Redick, who is now small forward eligible over on FanDuel because, well, why the hell not, is a strong cash option, has scored below 20 fantasy points in just one of his last 10 games. TJ McConnell would be one of the biggest value options on the slate if Simmons were to sit. If Butler sits, Corey Brewer would probably start again. Doesn't make him a great play, but yeah, it's Corey Brewer. He does have some potential. Again, I'll cover more of that game in Discord should, one of those guys get ruled out early. Moving on to the last game of the night, this one's really straightforward. There's not a whole lot to talk about. Denver at Utah. Utah 3-point favorites in this game, 217.5 over under. Could see Jared Vanderbilt suit up for the first time for the Nuggets here tonight. Juancho Hernan-Gomez is questionable. Donovan Mitchell has scored more than 20 points in each of the past 9 games, averaging 29.8 points per game over that stretch. Murray has been really, really strong. Has 4 straight games of shooting 50% or better, and is averaging 24 points per game over that span. Nikola Jokic against Cavaliers had his 3rd triple-double in the past 7 games. Looking at the Denver side of things, there's not a lot to like. Utah, really, really good defense. As a matter of fact, let's see. The Jazz, between these two teams, the Jazz have won 7 of the 7 meetings by an average of 14 points, and they have held Denver under 90 in 5 of those games. That's interesting. That's a pretty impressive trend. Utah, one of the best defenses in the NBA over the last 15 games. The only place where really you can attack them are 3-point shooters. That makes Jamal Murray, Gary Harris interesting. And then, of course, Nikola Jokic, who is the second coming of Russell Westbrook, is also interesting. Again, I mentioned Jamal Murray, averaging 36.1 fantasy points per game on 21.6 points, 4.4 assists, 4 rebounds, 50% 3-point shooting, and 46% shooting over his last few games, taking 27% of his shots as above the break threes, and Utah is allowing 36.7% on above the break threes. Jamal Murray, 7,100 on DraftKings, 6,900 on FanDuel, would be a tournament option only. Gary Harris could see right around 20 minutes here tonight. Is not a terrible large field tournament option, especially at 4,300 over on FanDuel, 4,800 on DraftKings. Paul Millsap, revenge game. Paul Millsap is kind of a guy that you can look at. 5,400 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Again, not going to play a ton of minutes. Could approach 30 in this spot. Obviously has the ability to stuff the stat sheet in those minutes. Is a guy that most nights is going to get you in the the mid 20s with some upside. Had a good game against Utah the last time these teams faced off. Nikola Jokic, again, has been channeling his inner Russell Westbrook, has 3 triple-doubles over his last 10 games, has double-digit assists in back-to-back games. He would just be tournaments. It's a terrible spot, but he did have 16 assists against the Jazz the last time these teams faced off. Almost had a triple-double in less than 30 minutes. Somewhat appealing, I guess. Again, this game is ugly. Utah side, still really ugly. These guys are really, really priced up. Denver, still a really good defense. And we don't know what Ricky Rubio's role is going to be. The best place to attack Denver lately has been at the rim, in the paint, and the 3-point line. Denver has allowed 66.2% shooting at the rim, 48% in the paint, and 41.5% on corner threes, 37% on above the break threes. Because of their struggles defending the 3-point line and the fact that they rank 21st in defensive efficiency to small forwards, Joe Ingles is an intriguing option here. He's Averaging 20, he's shooting 28.1% on his 3-point attempts and shooting 39.3% overall over his last few games. That's really, really bad. But at 5,600 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel, I think he is a very, very strong tournament option if you're trying to get some exposure to the late night game. Donovan Mitchell dropped another 50 fantasy point outing against Portland, but with Ricky Rubio back, I do expect him to fall back to earth a little bit. At 8,500 on DraftKings, 8,300 on FanDuel, you can roll him out in tournaments. Again, I'm not expecting him to continue to put up like 50-plus fantasy points most nights. Derek Favors, Jay Crowder, two guys that I think have some appeal here. Crowder, 58% of his shots come from three, 32% come at the rim or in the paint. He is really cheap. 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,400 on FanDuel. Coming off a 30 fantasy point outing, has been playing a little bit better. The shooting slump that we saw against like Detroit and Chicago and the Lakers has started to subside. He did have a really big game against his team last time out. 8 of 15 from the floor. It's not a terrible spot here for him tonight. I do have some interest in him. Rudy Gobert would be tournaments only. He has been a rebounding madman of late, getting a lot of blocks as well. More of a tournament option. And then Derek Favors, again, always a strong cash option just because of his ability to just fill it up in limited minutes. He's never going to play more than like 24, 26 minutes unless something were to happen to Gobert, but he does have the potential to put up a strong game in those limited minutes. But that's going to do it for today's 10-game slate. Again, going to need to keep an eye on the Philly game. Mostly that's pretty much all the major news that we have right now, but it is the NBA, so that means that something is going to pop up here shortly. I will be back on Friday, and good luck in all your contests tonight.